repost the link. You can find it on X on JS Jabber.
Okay, doing that now. Cool.
What's your link on X?
It's Shruti Kapoor 08. Let me share it with you.
Shruti is in one word?
Yes, I'll share it in the chat as well if I can.
No, Shruti Kapoor 08.
Yes,
Okay, found you.
and I'll also share this.
Are you also on Blue Sky?
I am, yes. Let me share that.
So let me, because I want to put your link. What's your thing on Blue Sky?
I just shared it in the chat as well.
Ah, okay. I'll look in the chat. Just a sec. I never find the chat on there on this thing.
Oh, it's the second one. It should say it's public chat, studio chat, and then I put it in the studio chat.
Yeah, okay. In the studio chat. Yeah, sure. I'll follow you also as long as I'm here.
Yay.
Just one more second. Um, Refresh this page. Okay, okie doke. Posted on both. And now we can start. You ready?
Yes.
Okay, then let's begin. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of JavaScript Jabber. Today on our show, we've got Shruti Kapoor. Hi, Shruti.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm kind of on the tail end of a head cold. Hopefully, I
Oh.
won't sound too stuffy today. But it's I'm back on at work, so that means I guess that I'm feeling better. Uh, Um, the weather here is actually pretty nice. I'm in Tel Aviv, Israel, and it's not really cold and it's pretty sunny, but it's it's the season for the sniffles, so it is what
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Um, and where are you coming from today?
So I'm in Seattle, and the weather here is cold, really cold,
And rainy.
and rainy, and dark and gloomy. But I've got some lights up, actually not in the background, but I've got some lights up in my house, so it makes me feel better.
Good for you. Good for you. And Shruti, you are an independent content creator, correct?
Yeah, so earlier this year, I used to work at Slack, and I quit my job in April to start developer education full time. I've actually been doing this part time for a long time. I made courses on O'Reilly as well, and I really like that. So I was like, why do we need stability? Let's just drop our job and go full time, make no money, and do all the education stuff.
So you're now an independent content creator talking about what?
So I talk about React and AI and web development and JavaScript and ThanStack and Next.js and all of the good stuff. So everything related to web development, specializing in React.
Cool, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about what's new and exciting in React 19, correct?
Yes.
And are there things that are new and exciting in React 19?
There's actually three things in React 19 update that I am super excited about, which I would love to get into in a bit. But I think this React update specifically, although this is like a minor update, it's 19.2. I think it has a ton of really cool features, which is really exciting for me because it's going to help me write less code and for other people as well who are building client side apps. So I'm pretty excited about it. This release actually focuses on client side developers a lot, not client side developers, app developers a lot, as opposed to like frameworks. There are some framework features, but the main kind of um, audience is app developers, which is perfect for me because I'm an app developer.
When you're saying app development, are you talking about web apps or are you
Yeah.
talking about native apps like React Native or both?
So I'm not talking about React Native. There are updates in React Native as well. I just completely ignore React Native because I'm a full web developer. So I'm just talking about app development in web. But there are updates in React Native as well.
Interesting. So, do we want to talk about both React 19 in general and 19.2, or do we want to focus just on one or the other?
Let's focus on 19.2 because there's a lot to talk about. And then if we have time, we can talk about 19. There's a ton of features that we can get into with 19.2. And this is the third update this year. So there's a lot to talk about.
Cool. So, first of all, if there's so much stuff in it, and if I recall correctly, React 19 itself was released something like almost 2 years ago. Why is it 19.2 and not 20?
I think the features are kind of incremental to what 19 has shared, which is like concurrent rendering, but like some updates on top of it. It's not a complete paradigm shift. So 18 was a big update because concurrent rendering and automatic patching was introduced. 19 introduced some new features like actions. And then what we have today kind of builds on top of it. It's a lot of focus on async React, a lot of focus on suspense, so that's why it's like a small update. It's like a minor update, not like a whole paradigm shift.
And I assume that it contains nothing that's kind of breaking changes or significant API changes or stuff like that. So
Correct. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
probably the reason.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, then. So, what is new and exciting about 19.2?
So there's a bunch of features. Let's talk about like the features that are introduced. So first of all, there is an activity component. I'll list out all the features and then we can kind of dive into them one by one.
Sure
So
thing.
we've got the activity component. We've got a view transition component. We've got performance tracks that come part of Chrome DevTools, which is awesome because we've been debugging with Profiler, and performance tracks is sort of like a magnified version of what your component is doing. So it helps in debugging. We've got use effect event, a new hook, and we have React compiler is now stable. And I know I'm missing one, but I can't remember which one.
Well, it'll probably pop into your head as we talk about the other stuff. By the way, as you mentioned React Compiler, I do want to mention to our listeners that we had Joe Savona and Satya from the Meta React core team, which is no longer part of Meta. And we had them on the show talking specifically about React Compiler. So if our listeners are interested in what React Compiler is and the details of what it does and what it doesn't do, I highly recommend listening to that episode. I'll find and I'll include the link in the show notes, but you can pretty easily find it if you search through the podcast catalog. Um, but if nonetheless, if you want to remind our listeners what React Compiler is and what is it all about and why we actually want it or need it.
Yeah, so actually, React Compiler is extremely exciting. If people remember, or like the way to memorize apps currently, or like the way to kind of improve the performance of your app, the first thing you would think about is, well, let me add use memo, use callback, right? That's like the first hook that comes to mind whenever you think about improving the performance of your app. Sometimes we blindly add use memo and use callbacks to all of our components and all of our functions just because, they are kind of hard to figure out where to add use memo and use callback. You have to use a profiler to figure out which components are slow, which functions are slow, where's the expensive calculations, and then memorize that. And even then, it is a hard thing to do. Now, with React Compiler, memoization is given to you out of the box. So you don't need to add use memo and use callback at all. In fact, at ReactConf, I was leading the panel with the core team, and this is the question that I asked them: that can you really remove use memo and use callbacks from your code right now? And the answer is yes. It is safe to remove use memo and use callback. So Compiler helps to enable auto memoization, which means that your code is auto memoized. You don't need to add use memo, use callback to make sure that it is optimized for performance.
I would even argue that it's beyond safe. It's even preferable
Mhm,
uh, because if I recall correctly, when React compiler sees, let's say, use memo in a component, it basically bails
mhm.
out of optimizing that component.
Yeah,
And so theoretically, at least, React compiler, if it's working correctly and does what it's supposed to do, can actually optimize your component beyond the specific manual optimizations that you implemented using memo or use memo.
yeah,
So in effect, it can do extra memoization, and if you have your own explicit use memo, you're kind of forcing it to bail out because it says, hey, you know what you want to do, I'm not going to get in your way, and then you might actually lose out on some optimizations.
yeah. And the way they both do memoization is a little bit different. React Compiler memoizes in a different way than use memo. So, um, yeah, like when you do manual memoization, React Compiler is like, you seem to know what you're doing. So you go ahead and do your thing.
Yeah, just to remind our listeners in case they forgot, the benefits of memoization is like threefold, as I recall correctly. First of all, it avoids unnecessary computations.
Hmm.
Second, it avoids unnecessary renders.
Hmm.
And third, it retains referential consistency, which avoids re-renders down the line. It basically, if you think about the dependency arrays in use effect and stuff like that, they are dependent on referential identity, not a value
Hmm.
identity. And if you get referential identity, you avoid even more re-renders than and stuff like that than you would otherwise perform. And I
Yeah,
think even the rendering engine itself, when it sees the referential identity, it knows to cut out and totally not traverse certain parts of the VDOM tree because it can immediately identify that nothing has changed. So you're
yeah.
effectively making the entire system just basically faster and more efficient.
Yeah. And to give an example of what that means is, let's say you have a function where, let's just say you're calling console log or fetching an API or whatever, just simple function. And that function is a dependency of use effect. So what referential identity means is that when you haven't added any callback or things, every time you render, that is a new function. So when React looks at it, it's like, oh, dependency of use effect changed. So I need to run this effect again. So this way you're running effect multiple times if you have a function as a dependency. But if you add a use callback to that function, now React has memoized that, and now it knows that this is the same reference as previous time, so it won't re-render if nothing changed. So that reduces the amount of times you run use effects.
And again, with React Compiler, you basically just remove all your explicit uses of memo, and use callback, and just let React Compiler do its magic.
Mm.
By the way, another advantage of React Compiler from my perspective, potentially even a greater advantage from my perspective, is that it's effectively a React linter.
Hmm.
It has that it knows the rules of React or the best practices of React, and will actually warn you if you're violating any of these React best practices. Correct?
I don't know if the compiler does that. I know there's a the plugin ESLint plugin actually warns you when you're breaking React rules. And in fact, when the compiler, so one way to see that you're breaking React rules is when you look at the compiled code. If you see that your code is intact and hasn't been memoized, it's because the compiler bailed because you haven't followed rules of React. So that way, it's easy to kind of see where you're breaking rules of React. So yeah, it does know when you're breaking rules of React, and it just like bails out for those things.
Cool. And you said that in React version 19.2, React compiler is now officially a stable part of the release.
Yeah. So the Babel plugin, so React compiler is still available as a Babel plugin. Now it is stable. It was in RC stage for a long time, and the community was wondering when it's going to be stable. So at React Conf, it was announced that it is stable. And what's cool is that it not only works for React 19, but it also works for 18 and 17. So which is really cool because now you have backwards compatibility, so you can go ahead and remove your use memos.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. So if you've got a project that's built on top of React 18 and you don't feel like an upgrade, you can basically, what you're saying is just drop in React compiler and hope for the best.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can install a Babel plugin, and your compiler will like start memoizing. I've actually added React compiler to an app where I didn't change anything else. I just added React compiler, just added the plugin, and noticed that my renders, like re-renders, were reduced from 32 to just 7, which is crazy.
Wow. Yes, definitely it is. That's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Re-renders are kind of the bane of our existence as React developers.
Yeah, and even for the ones that were being re-rendered, the amount of time it took to render that was reduced as well. So the height of the graph, like in React Profiler, when you look at the graph of the components, the height of the bar itself was lower, so it took lesser time to render by just adding React Compiler, which is crazy.
Interesting. We have a React 18 project where I work, and upgrading is not trivial because it kind of shares the React library instance between multiple micro front ends. So
Hmm.
we kind of need to upgrade all of them in order to upgrade one of them. That's the way
Hmm.
it's currently implemented for us. And being able to just drop in maybe React compiler to see some performance improvements should be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Something I should definitely look into.
Yeah, and the newest plugin, so with React 19.2, the ESLint plugin also got an upgrade. So it's V6 now, and it also has React compiler rules built in. So I haven't actually used the plugin, but my guess is that it also warns you when you're breaking rules of React.
That's really useful. So okay, so one great thing about React version 19.2 is the stable React compiler. What
Mhm.
else?
The other thing that I'm excited about is the activity component. Okay, so this component is really cool because one of the biggest things that we as app developers have been doing is storing the state of where we are in the app, especially a component, and then resuming from it. So an example would be, let's say you type something in search, and then the user clicks away from search, and then they open it back again. You kind of want to show them what they had typed, right? Or you want to kind of keep the results that they were looking for. Now, currently, the way to do that, or pre 19.2, is by storing that state. And then when the user pops up again, you check if the component is open and you reload from that state. With 19.2, this activity component actually gives it to you out of the box. So all you got to do is wrap your component in activity, and it understands to store the state, and it's actually going to give you that that state that you've written in the text input for free. So when you open and close and then open again, you'll see what you've stored so far. So I built an example component with Netflix where, you know how in Netflix, when you are on or even in YouTube actually, but when you are when you're watching, when you're on the home page and you're watching a trailer, like when you hover on an item, the trailer starts playing and then you move away and then you come back and the trailer restarts. I hate that. I wanted to continue from where I was because,
Actually, that's what YouTube does for me, and sometimes I really hate it
yeah,
because
right?
it starts playing muted in the when you hover on top, and then when you click it, it starts playing with full audio, but you're already somewhere inside the video. So now, if you want to hear it from the beginning, you kind of have to rewind each and every time. It can be annoying.
Exactly. I hit that. And in Netflix specifically, because like it start like I want to see the trailer, yes, but it starts off and it's loud and everything, and then I move away and then it restarts the trailer. So I kind of want to continue from where it was watching,
Yeah,
right?
that I definitely agree with.
Yeah, and so I made a Netflix clone and I added activity component to it, and that's all I did. So I had like a trailer, it would autoplay when you hover on it, and then when you move away, it would stop playing, and then when you come back, it would autoplay again. And all I did was add activity to that component, and then when I hovered away and came back, it remembered my state. So it knew how much video was played, which was cool because I had to do nothing else to fix that, and it was so awesome.
So just to understand correctly, so you kind of wrap your component in an activity component, kind of like what we used to have with higher order components, per
Yeah.
my understanding. And what state does it store? The props that are passed into that component,
It remembers your
or
DOM state basically. So like when you're playing the video,
the
it's
DOM
how much
state or the VDOM state?
the VDOM state. So like if you have a video, the amount that has been buffered, the amount that has been played, it remembers that. Same with like input. If it knows that you have put something in, it remembers that.
Hmm.
Same with like scrolling a feed. So another thing that you could do is if you have a sidebar and you've got like 10 different items and you've scrolled down to let's say the fifth or sixth item and you're on the second or fourth page, it remembers where in DOM you are, like where in the scroll position you are. So it remembers that. So I think it's beyond props because these are not props that you would pass to a component. This is just coming from DOM state, right? So it remembers your state.
I understand. So it's kind of like freeze drawing the component state. I assume stuff like all the data that's kind of stored in hooks is somehow preserved between calls or between re-renders in a sense. uh, I would definitely have to look at it. I understand what you're saying, but I'm still kind of wondering exactly what it does. So it's definitely something that I will look into following our conversation because, like you said, it sounds like a very useful functionality that you're effectively getting for free, as it were.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I
Are
think
there any gotchas though with this kind of thing? Have you run into problems or issues like that can bite people if they use the activity?
yeah.
Like
So
because otherwise you might just wrap your entire application in this huge activity at the at the root of your VDOM tree and hope for the best.
yeah. So actually, one of the things that I noticed when I was implementing this video player component was that when I hover away, sometimes the video keeps playing. It's not consistent, but sometimes the video will keep playing. So one of the things I had to add was now because the video is in the DOM and React doesn't actually have control on the DOM, it only has control over VDOM. So sometimes the video keeps playing. So one of the things that I had to do was make sure that in my component I add a new hook called use layout effect, which actually stops the video from playing when the component has been unmounted. So sometimes there might be weird edge cases when your component has been unmounted in activity.
Mhm. Okay. I also assume it has a certain amount of overhead.
Yeah, I mean, it I can assume that, like I can understand that. um, because your components are kind of in state, so it can definitely have some overhead, especially if you have like multiple different tabs and you've got like data loading in each of those tabs. I haven't experimented with that myself to know what the implications are, but I can totally imagine that could be the case.
Also, how many level down does it go? I mean, like I said, what happens if I put an activity wrapper around the entire application? Is it like preserving the entire state of every subcomponent in the VDOM tree?
Wow, I haven't tried that. That would be fun to try. uh, I imagine like your app probably just breaks at that point. I don't think your state would be restored, but that would be fun to try. Like have like maybe like 10 different inputs and just put activity on top of everything.
Interesting. Anyway, like you said, it sounds really interesting and potentially very useful. So this is definitely something that I'll look at and play with after our conversation. Well, probably not immediately after, because it's actually pretty late here in Israel. But maybe tomorrow. But it does sound really really interesting, and like I said, potentially very useful.
Mhm.
Anything else about activity before we move on to your next favorite thing about React 19.2?
So I think activity is really cool because a lot of the demos that we saw at ReactConf were showing using activity to kind of preload data. So one of the cool things is, imagine you have two tabs. You put your components. Something that actually, one of the things that activity is helpful for is replacing conditional rendering. So what we did initially was, we have, let's say, two tabs, and in one tab we render if the tab is, let's say, home, and in another one we actually render a list of posts, which would be like a post tab. So typically what would happen is, if you have conditional rendering, you load the first component, the first tab, and then when you switch to the second component is when you load that component, right? So you'll see like a little loading screen when you switch to the second one. With activity, what you could do is you could wrap both of those tabs within activity, and so when you switch between the two, the second one is already ready because it has pre-rendered your data. So that is something that activity is really helpful for as well. One caveat though is that if you have data rendering in use effect, it will not work because activity doesn't actually mount your effects until, or it doesn't actually run your effects until the component gets mounted. But if you have like a suspense powered component, like for example, if you're using use, or if you have Next.js data fetching, then that'll work like that'll work in activity. So to preload your data before you even move to that component. So that's really cool.
Y- I assume that, well, certainly if you put it in suspense, then it functions asynchronously to the rest of the application. But because otherwise, I don't know if activity is like asynchronous by default, or if it needs suspense for that. Because if it's not asynchronous, then you might be getting in the way of your primary content. No?
So it is not, you don't need suspense for it, and anything that is rendered in activity is actually a lower priority than everything else. um, I think you mentioned like adding suspense. And one of the difference between adding suspense and activity is that when you do add a suspense, you would actually see a fallback as the data is loading, right? While when you add actually activity, that component is loaded, and then the other component actually gets loaded in the background on lower priority. So your current component still has, like the component that is visible still has higher priority, as opposed to the component that is in the hidden state. So activity actually gives you like two modes: a hidden state and an active state, a visible state and a hidden state. So the visible state components have higher priority than the hidden state components.
Yes, I'm looking at the React documentation right now, and I'm seeing it. So basically, a mode attribute that can be set to either the string visible or the string hidden.
Hmm.
And like you're saying, when it's hidden, it's lower priority, essentially asynchronous, I assume, and
Hmm.
lower priority than visible content.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not surprising. Interesting. Um, yeah, I guess that's another one of the benefits that we get from the whole refactoring of React to use fibers instead of the previous rendering engine, is that now they can really control to a fine-grained degree what gets rendered when.
Yeah.
And that provides a whole lot of opportunities for optimization such as
Hmm.
these.
And you can pause and restart, and like pause and resume your rendering when you need it to be. I think one question that people often have. So basically, the way activity works is that it actually adds a display none to the component. So one question that people usually have is it any different than just adding display none? One advantage is that it actually restores your state. Second is like it pre-renders your data. But another like advantage that I noticed is that when I add display none, just display none through CSS, versus if I add activity, there's a difference in LCP as well. So display none takes longer to load as compared to activity, which was very interesting.
I assume, well, it's interesting to look at what actually gets rendered into the DOM itself when activity is used. Are you saying that when activity is hidden, it renders into the DOM with display none,
Mhm.
or it achieves the same effect as a display none but without using display none?
So it actually uses display none. So let's say that you have two tabs, home and post. If you add activity and you move from home to post, in the DOM, what you would see is that it adds a display none to the component that is hidden. And then when you move back, it removes display none. So it's literally adding that display none style to the component. But the question also arises like, well, is it the same if I just add display none and not add activity? So what I've
W-
noticed is it's different.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised that it's different because, well, at the DOM level, it might be effectively the same,
Mhm.
but at the VDOM level, it's different because
Yeah,
because if you just add or remove display none, the VDOM does the same thing that it would do either way. The VDOM does not know or care about display none.
yeah,
Whereas with activity, you know that you're going to be putting display none, but you also know that you can avoid certain amount of work and comparisons and stuff like that at the VDOM level because you know that this stuff is not going to be visible anyway.
exactly.
So, so I assume again, I'm guessing because I've not actually played with this mechanism yet myself, but I assume or I'm guessing that this is what's actually happening. Really, really interesting. Definitely something that I should play with.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about it. I've added to like a bunch of my apps, and oh my god, it's so nice to like not have to think about adding this UX state and storing them and then refetching from them. It makes life as a app developer much easier. The focus is a lot on like UX improvements, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's about the whole. It's about two things really. If I'm thinking about it this way, first of all, it's about that declarative aspect of React, about in telling React what you want done rather than explaining how to do it. So
Hmm.
rather than using all sorts of hooks and whatnot in imperative code, you just, like with suspense, you drop it into your VDOM tree or your component tree actually would be the better term to use in this context. And and then just reap the benefits.
Hmm.
I do see from looking at the documentation that activity is kind of related to view transition or impacted by it. So maybe it's worthwhile to transition, pun intended, to view transition.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about view transition?
Yeah, so Vue Transition is actually really interesting. It is still part of the experimental part release of React. It's not stable in 19.2, but Vue Transition was one of the main features that were shown in React Conf. So I think it's worth talking about it, especially because activity and Vue Transition kind of go hand in hand. So the thing that Vue Transition does is it adds the CSS animating effect to any component that you wrap it in. So, for example, you've got view transition on a component where, let's say, you've got the same video player kind of component, you're watching trailers, and when you click on it, you want to show like a nice zoom out effect. So you can add view transition, and then you can give it what kind of animation effect you want it to do, or you can just leave it as default and you get like a nice fade in effect. And
Yeah, I
so,
think it's, if I might interrupt you for a second, it's, first of all, I seem to recall that we discussed this in a previous episode of JavaScript Jabber. I'll need to look and see when and then add the appropriate link to the show notes. But it's kind of important to understand or to note that view transitions are a browser DOM feature.
mhm,
They're
yeah,
not a React feature. They're
correct.
implemented by the browser itself. So the
Hmm.
browser these days is able to animate your DOM from a certain state to a different sort of state. And the example that you gave is the kind of the canonical example of like the Netflix type user interface, where when you click on a particular video, that video expands to cover the entire display. because you're going into that particular movie or TV show or whatever. And hopefully my dog's barking is not creating too much background noise. Um, and like you said, it can animate from one state to another,
Hmm.
something that in the past people would need to jump through a lot of hoops in order to be able to achieve something like that. Now it's basically built into the browser.
Hmm.
Now remember, we actually had Noam Rosenthal, who actually took over the spec in the W3C for this functionality. I think it was originally done by Jake Archibald, and then I think Noah Mosenthal took it over. And as I recall, we actually had him on the show to talk about it. Again, in the context of the browser itself, rather than in the context of a particular framework. React is not the only framework that has support for it. I think there's also support for it in Svelte, as I recall,
Hmm.
and Solid, I think. So it's not uniquely for React, but it's really nice to see that React is now has built-in support for it with a view transition component that you can just wrap your components in. So can you elaborate on what exactly that view transition component does?
Yeah, so you explained it perfectly. It is basically used for animating from one state to another. So, an example that we have been talking about is the Netflix app. So, when you actually open the trailer and you see like this nice like effect, like fade in effect into the next page or the next component, that's what view transition can help you do. So now instead of having to manually add an animation, you can wrap it within view transition. It adds the the classes. I think it's view transition old and new, which actually adds the slide in and slide out, or like fade in and fade out effect. So it gives you animation out of the box. Um, yeah, I think that's probably the best example.
So you would have a certain, you would have components wrapped in the view transition component, and then when you wanted to create that animation, what do you do? Do you replace the components that are contained within the view transition? Do you do something else? What exactly do you do in order
So
to trigger the animation?
yeah, so now to trigger the animation, that's a great question. Basically, what you want to do is let React know when you want to start transitioning to the next component. So what you do is, let's say that you have a button that actually initiates. So like when you click on the trailer, the button actually navigates to the next element. That's when you want to wrap that button or that on-click handler into a start transition. And that
Hmm.
will let React know that at this point, I need to start the transition of actually adding the old, like removing the old view transition and adding in the new view transition effect. And that's where the nice animation comes in. So you need to actually trigger the view transition by using a start transition function. And that you wrap around whichever element should trigger the next component. So for example, if you have a button that actually opens a new component, that's where you would add it.
Understood. Makes sense. So React has to know when you're actually instigating that transition and
Mhm.
when what you're actually transitioning on.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very cool. So what is the relation between activity and view transition?
So I'm trying to remember, like, let me look at the doc to see what it actually talks
It's
about.
not that important if you don't remember off the top of your head, but I seem to recall that there is some sort of a connection there.
Yeah, I know that they go hand in hand. I'm trying to remember, like, what was the example that was showed in the conference? I'm totally forgetting
It
it.
says, oh, it's actually under caveats. It says if an activity is rendered inside a view transition and
Oh,
becomes
yes.
visible as a result of an update caused by start transition, it will activate the view transition's enter animation. If
Hmm.
it becomes hidden, it will activate its exit animation.
Yeah. So
Okay,
actually, like, activity works as the start transition effect. So when you have that component come in and it's been wrapped in view transition, that's when it starts animating in. So the view transition has started the transition when activity is visible.
makes sense. Um, makes sense. Because effectively that's probably what you want
Hmm.
if
Yeah.
you're okay. Okay then. Obviously, our listeners, one of the downsides of a podcast is that it's a audio medium. We can't actually show you stuff. I think Shruti is doing an amazing job of explaining just verbally. But if you want to see, then the React website has a lot of actual examples. Or alternatively, if you use something like a Cursor, you can tell it, write an example for me of some code that uses this or that feature of React, and then you can look at what it created.
Yeah. If you do that, the only thing I would do is give it the documentation and then tell it to create an example with the source of the documentation. Because I've noticed that when I give it, like, create, especially with this newest updates, when I haven't tried this with Cursor, but I've tried this with Claude. But when I tell it to create an example, it actually doesn't give the accurate results. So give it the documentation.
Yeah, but it gives inaccurate results with complete confidence.
Yes. So you wouldn't know. Um, Oh, one thing I wanted to say is the Netflix example that I'm talking about, that is also on my YouTube channel. So if you're looking to see how, like, what the code behind that is, it's also on my YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to that.
Excellent. That will be awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, show some love and support for Shruti in her new endeavor.
Yay.
Uh, exactly. So we talked about React Compiler, we talked about activity, we talked about view transition. What do we want to talk about next?
So there's two more things that I want to talk about, and let's talk about use effect event, which is the only hook that comes in this release. Um, Use effect event is a hook that I am super excited about because it helps to clean up use effects, and I have seen so many places where this could be useful. So, and so many mistakes that happen with the use effect. So, I think generally use effect could use some love, and use effect event comes at the right time. So, what use effect event does is it helps to remove reactive and non reactive values out of use effect. So, we were talking about this earlier, where if we have a dependency in use effect, anytime that dependency changes, we rerun the use effect, right? That causes a lot of re renders. But imagine if you have a perfect example for this is imagine if you have a page where you just want to log the impression of when the user landed on this page. And then you want to log some other aspects of the page as well, like what is the user's name, what time is it, things like that, right? So additional things that you want to log as soon as the user lands on the page. So in that case, when you add a use effect and you log analytics in that use effect, what you would be doing is you would be adding like name and time, maybe not time because time's so dynamic, but name and like page and route and things like that. Go ahead.
Basically, if I understood correctly, and I looked at some examples, unlike the previous two, which I haven't looked at, I did look at this one for some reason. And when you're using a certain value in use effect, React kind of requires you to include that value in the dependency array. If you
Exactly.
don't, you will actually get squiggly lines for it, and React will
Hmm.
complain. Again, not at runtime, but at build time,
Hmm.
React will actually complain about it. And therefore, if you have a certain value, if you use a certain value within your use effect, you're kind of forced to include it in the dependency array. The problem is
Exactly.
that if you include it in the dependency array, every time that it changes, it forces that use effect to be reevaluated,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
not, which may not be what you want. Like you said, if I'm only using that particular value, let's say as the example that you gave, to write to the console, I want to, when I write to the console, I want to use the current value. But if that value changes, I don't want to rerun use effect just because there's a different output to the console.
Hmm.
So is that correct?
Yeah, and that's exactly correct. And like you would want to, for example, log impression only once when the user has landed. And even if the path changes or something else changes or a prop changes, you don't necessarily want to log the same impression again. It could be a false impression as well, like you are adding data that you don't need. So in that case, like you said, if you add that in the dependency array, which React will actually force you to, you will be causing that function to run again and again, that effect to run and again. So what use effect event does is you can move the non-reactive values, and non-reactive value basically mean things and dependencies that you don't want to rerun your effect for. You don't want to react to that value. So you can move a non-reactive value outside in a use effect event. That's why it's called use effect event, because it's used to move event logic, which is like items that change, that items that you just want to read the value out of, you don't want to react to it. So you can move those values, for example, in this case, maybe the path name or maybe the username, things like that, into a use effect event. And then you use that use effect event within the use effect. So it's actually like a helper hook for use effect. And that actually prevents you from reading the dependency, or like reading the reactive values or reading the non-reactive values, and prevents you from adding that to your dependency array, which reduces the amounts of time you re-render your component and rerun your effects.
I remember or that in the past when I prior to this version of React, when I wanted to achieve similar effect, again pun intended, I would use ref for it.
Hmm.
I would generate references to values, and then even if I I'm forced to put the reference inside the dependency array, the reference itself doesn't change. The value that the references does change. So this is kind of a way to circumvent the problem.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, but it's always felt like a kind of a dirty trick or a cheap trick, like y- essentially using refs for values that shouldn't that can change but shouldn't cause a re-render
Hmm.
is doable but kind of felt dirty in a
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
like this is not what refs were originally intended for.
Exactly.
And now we can be much more explicit about it and not use a hack.
Yeah. Precisely.
Cool. So that's really nice. um, it seems, though, to be honest, it seems like something that is really helpful when you actually need it,
Hmm.
but not something that you might be using all the time. Like
Yeah.
almost all the examples that I'm hearing about end up talking about console logs. So,
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, the biggest example that comes to my mind is about analytics impressions, because that's the one where you don't really want to react to a dependency that you've added. Um,
mm.
yeah. It's
So
kind of like UV
anything
out effect. Like when you need that effect, like when you need that hook, that is the right hook. But otherwise, that hook is not very commonly used.
So anything related to observability, as it were, that
Yeah,
where you want to observe current values, up-to-date values, but you don't want to have to impact the actual behavior of the application because you're just observing it.
correct.
Interesting. I think that's a good um, point of view on that particular topic. I think that sounds like potentially the primary use case.
Hmm.
Really, very, very interesting. Okay, then. Uh, I think well, we still have some time. So, do we have more items
We
in
have one
React?
more thing we can talk about that I'm super excited about. Uh,
Okay, go for it.
Probably the most exciting thing in this release is the performance tracks in Chrome DevTools. So, if you've been debugging React apps, you know that you need to install an external extension called React DevTools, which gives you Profiler, and I think it gives you components as well as part of
Yes, it
your.
does. It provides you a component view that's kind of similar to the built-in elements panel. So you
Uh-huh.
got a built-in components panel, which you can you're basically seeing components and their state and their properties, which is really useful for understanding what the VDOM actually looks like at any
Yes.
point in time. And
Uh-huh.
like you said, you have something that's kind of similar to the DevTools Performance tab, only it looks at component re-renders, so you can use it to identify excessive re-renders. I've used it on multiple occasions to identify excessive re-renders and try to mitigate them.
Yeah, so those tools are really helpful. Like,
Basically, just a flame chart that
yeah,
kind
a
of
flame
shows
chart.
you re-renders.
And that profiler tool is very helpful, especially for figuring out how many times your component re-rendered. And that is the tool that I was using when I was working with React Compiler to figure out when the compiler is had it, just how many times it reduced the re-renders. So that tools are still really helpful. But there is a now default tool that comes with Chrome DevTools if you have React 19.2 installed, which is the performance tracks. And that is part of the performance tab within Chrome. So you don't need to install anything else, which is really cool. But what this does is when you inspect a component, actually what you have to do to enable this, this is a little bit of gotcha, which not that easy to understand, not that easy to see, is you actually have to record the performance. So there's like a recording tab. You have to record, and then you can like go through your app and do what you need to do, see like which clicks and whatever you need to record. Then when you stop that recording, that's when you'll start seeing the performance tabs. So in the performance tab of Chrome DevTools, now you'll see two new tracks. They're called, I think they're called components, and then they're called scheduler, if I remember the name correctly. But they have a little React logo. So that shows you that this is coming from React 19.2. But what they actually show you is, let's say you clicked on an element and then you're fetching the data in the background, and then you're waiting for, you're like, you have got a loader coming in, and then you're waiting for data to fill in, and then you have got some like changes in the DOM that's happening, changes on the UI that's happening. Now that performance track will actually log and show you all of that on the track itself. So you can actually see at one point you clicked, how long did that take, how much layout shift did that cause, what is the blocking part of this process. So when you're actually fetching data, that could be part of blocking. So now if you add suspense, it'll show you like this is where suspense boundaries came in. So this is a really cool way to see what is your component doing when you've made an interaction, when you're doing something with it. And it's really helpful to see exactly in which phases your component is blocked, in which phases the React VDOM is actually committing. Um, and it is a really cool way of debugging your React apps. So much better than Profiler.
Interesting. I assume it's only active or only shows this extra information when React is in the development mode,
That's
not
probably true, yeah.
because otherwise I assume that there would just be too much overhead.
Yeah, it'd be weird to show that in for production apps. I haven't tested in production, so I'm not sure, but assume that's the case.
I'll definitely take a look at that one. You may or may not know I'm something of a performance junkie.
Oh,
My current role is more let's call it general.
hmm.
I'm a principal engineer at Sisense, so I deal with a lot of stuff, not specifically having to do with performance, but my previous two roles was performance tech lead. So
Oh,
and I'm still on the W3C Web Performance Working Group. So so web performance is kind of my jam.
that's
So
cool.
yeah, so if there's this new functionality in the performance tab in DevTools, I definitely want to check it out. And thank you for pointing it out. It's really exciting. It's something I'll definitely look into.
Yeah, you might really appreciate it. So it's available in 19.2. You don't have to do anything. The only kind of I spend a lot of time like figuring out where these tracks are. The only kind of gotcha there is you have to record performance and then see it, and then you'll see it.
Now, I have you done a video on this?
Yeah, so in the React 19 video, I launched, I do show how to inspect an element with performance tracks.
And do you also provide like a GitHub example application that you can actually play with this stuff?
Yeah, so actually in the video link, there is a GitHub example as well. Let me put up the video so it's easier.
No, you know, we can uh, put the link for our listeners, but I really don't want to show the video because then our listeners are kind of missing out. I think it's sufficient to say that we will definitely put the link to to Shruti's content, and you're definitely encouraged to go out and check it out, and and what like and subscribe, right?
Like and subscribe.
Yeah, you need to get into that game.
Like, subscribe, and comment, and hit that bell icon.
So you never miss
So you
your
never miss a
notification.
notification from Shruti Kapoor.
Excellent, excellent. Uh, we do have something like 10 more minutes, I think, maybe even 15. So, is there anything else we want to talk about, either about 19.2 or 19 in general?
I think one of the big kind of themes about 19, especially as you'll see in the conference talks, is async React, which is something that I want to dive deeper into, which is we have been using UseEffects to call our APIs if we don't have any other frameworks or data fetching libraries, which has just been the general way, right? But React 19 introduces use hook, which is used to resolve promises. So with 19.2 and the conference talks that we've seen in 19.2's React conference, a big focus has been how to move away from data fetching and use effect to actually using React the async way, which is by fetching data through the use hook, wrapping it with suspense, and then perhaps adding animations to view transitions and activity, like showing in and out through activity. So I think with React 19's release, the way we're going to be fetching data is changing. So I am very excited to try that out. That's going to be another video that I'll do on my channel in January. But I think the main focus is that we're going to be changing the way we've been fetching data um, in React 19.
I totally agree. And interestingly, it's going to be one of my picks, but I'm actually giving a talk at the upcoming React Next conference in Israel.
Oh, cool.
It's Israel's largest front end conference. It originally was React specific, but it has, even though it's retained its name of React Next, it's effectively become kind of a general purpose front end conference, and not just about the React ecosystem.
Hmm.
I think we are going to have something like somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 attendees. It was like
Wow.
sold out within a week or something like that. Uh,
Wow.
I'm actually, if I, I might brag, I'm actually beyond giving a talk. I'm actually giving the keynote. Uh,
Oh, that's
so,
awesome.
yeah, which is kind of amusing because I'm not talking about AI. But you would think that any talk, any keynote at a front end conference these days is going to be somehow about AI. Not mine.
Nice.
But the reason that I'm bringing it up is that the topic of my talk is actually about RPC.
Hmm.
If our listeners are interested, it's kind of reminiscent of the conversation that we had with Ryan Carniato and Tanner Lindsley a couple of episodes ago about RPC and how it's kind of making this significant comeback in modern front end frameworks, or full stack frameworks to be more accurate. And the reason that I'm bringing up is that one of the things that I'm showing is using ORPC, an RPC library within React component to talk from the front end to some API on the back end.
Hmm.
And ORPC makes access to backend services look like function calls, kind of similar to what um, Next.js does with server actions and React Server components. So it's kind of similar in that respect. So you're calling a backend function, and rather than getting a value, not surprisingly, what you get back is a promise.
Hmm.
And now you can just use it inside use,
Hmm.
and it makes it look exactly like a function call. You just wrap it in use. Effectively, you might say that in this regard, use is kind of React's replacement for await in client side components.
Mhm.
In React Server components, you can actually use await because they're running on the back end, and there's no problem with that. But on the front end, because of the way that React works, you cannot actually use await in the component itself. You have to kind of wrap it in a use effect or something, and now you can just use instead of effectively as an await inside client-side components. So that's
Mhm.
really cool. So
Yeah.
the demo that I'm showing is effectively just calling this function on the back end in order to get a value, and using that value in the render to in the rendered component, and I use. So this way I get, and it's wrapped inside suspense. So this way it makes the call to the back end. While it's waiting for the content to arrive from the back end, it shows the fallback and or the placeholder or the loader or whatever. And once that value arrives, then it immediately re-renders using that value that was received from the back end. It's really cool.
Hmm.
Uh, and it sounds, it's one of those things that's much easier to show than to explain verbally. All I can say is it's very readable code, much more readable than if I had to use effect instead.
Yeah. That's a cool example. Like, so you're returning data through an RPC call, and because it's a promise, you can use on it.
Exactly.
Oh, that's cool. Huh. That's kind of
Exactly.
like what how Tanstack Start does server actions as well. So server actions are just RPC call, um, and typically you put that in your loader, but you could totally put that as a use as well within your React
Yeah,
component.
it actually is a little bit tricky because if you're not careful with it, you can get into kind of this re-render loop,
Mm,
because every time the component renders, you get a new promise.
hmm,
So you kind of need to be careful about it. And one of the great things about something a library like TenStack Query is that it does the automatic deduping or caching for you and make
mhm,
sure you get the same promise each and every time. So
mhm.
you're not getting into these kind of re-render loops if you're using use. So it can be a little bit tricky if you're using use directly, which is why I'd probably recommend using something like 10 stack query in these types of scenarios. And by the way, going back to my example of ORPC, there's actually, I think, a 10 stack query wrapper for ORPC.
Oh,
So you can use them together really, really nicely, or just use 10 stack start if you want to have
yeah,
an RPC capabilities in your full stack framework.
cool.
Yeah, it's something that I discussed at length with our common friend. We found out that he's a friend of both of us, Jack Harrington, great guy.
Yes,
Yeah, I love this guy. And he makes amazing content as well.
he makes amazing content.
Yeah. Um, anyway, so yeah, I really like Use. I think it will definitely change the way that people write client-side components
Hmm.
in React. Although there, like I said, there are a few gotchas there, and people will need to get used to it and learn how to properly use it. Again, pun intended.
Yeah, the suspense is building up.
Exactly,
Yeah, I
exactly.
think use with suspense and view transition and activity is kind of the future of React, and I'm very excited to see it in action.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that suspense, when it landed, opened up a huge amount of possibilities. This whole thing about asynchronous reactivity
Mm.
in React is a sea change, and we're still experiencing the outcomes and the benefits of these changes, and also the added complexities associated
Mhm.
with them. It's definitely a different model to learn and to understand with regard to how React actually works and
Mhm.
what happens when.
Mhm.
Okay, we're close to finishing our time for and going to picks. You know what? I'll give us 10 or 10 more minutes to talk about React stuff before we go to picks. Is there anything else you think we should be talking about in the context of React 19?
I think those are the biggest things that comes to my mind. I'm super excited about React compiler being stable. I can't wait for removing. I can't wait to remove all the use memos and use callbacks. That's the one that I'm most excited about. Activity is a component that I am specifically excited about because I built a lot of apps where I've had to actually store the state. So I can't wait to refactor my apps.
Do you consider, okay, so per my understanding, use client and use server, even though they need a full stack framework in order to work, which means that they need either Next.js or 10 stack,
Mm.
um, you would consider them to be part of React, though, right?
So they are part of React. They are directives, but I don't think they work in Tanstack. Not in
Oh,
Start.
yeah, 10 stack has its own alternative, I think.
Yeah, so Tanstack just has like create server function, which is the same as use server, and then you don't need to use client because everything is client first. Um, I think they only work in Next.js.
Understood. And use cache, that's a Next.js thing. That's not
Hmm.
even a React thing, right?
I can't remember. I know it's a Next.js thing. I don't know if it's like a React thing. There's use cache, and then there's a new one which created a lot of controversy. I'm trying to
Oh,
remember.
use workflow, but
Yeah,
that's not even a Next.js thing. That's a Vercel thing.
right. So there's so many use hooks, use directives. Um, and the only place that I've seen them being used is
Do you
Next.js.
remember the original one though? Use strict.
Oh, that's a standard.
That's where they all come from.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, that's true. Now that's a standard. Yeah,
yeah, well, that's part of JavaScript. Even that's
yeah,
not even React. That's just
right.
JavaScript itself.
I guess that's where it comes from. You're right.
Yeah, that's the origin. That's the OG.
Oh, gee.
Exactly. Now we've got all bunch. It's getting to the point where if this keeps on going, we'll probably need some standardization body to ensure
Yeah,
that we don't get conflicts on the various uses.
yeah. And that's the thing, right? Like these are not standards. They are not type safe. So you have to remember to add the directives to the files. It's a lot of mental overhead.
On the other hand, they're declarative, which I can
Hmm.
appreciate.
Hmm.
I know that uh, originally they were actually, if you, I don't know if you know this or remember this, but originally they thought to use the file names. So
Hmm.
instead of having use server and use client, they thought about having dot client dot tsx and dot server dot tsx in the actual file name. And then they decided that they needed greater granularity and have it more declarative in the code itself
Hmm.
rather than an external place like the file name. I think that Svelte, on the other hand, does intentionally use file names for these sort of distinctions.
Hmm.
So
I see.
it's a different take on the same approach. But on the one hand, I really like the declarative approach, basically saying what you want
Hmm.
rather than how to actually do it. I am concerned about, like you said, all these uses because they're kind of outside the scope of the language. The fact that it's a string intentionally forces the language to kind of ignore it,
Hmm.
um, and being an inline string, and there's no standardization around it, and it's an interesting question. I assume that the linters will be updated and modified to take this into account when they're parsing the code. I see no reason why not.
Hmm.
But I have to say that I was thinking at one point or another that if decorators would have already been standardized as part of JavaScript and not just as part of TypeScript, then
Mm.
maybe we should have used decorators instead for these sort of things.
That's true.
Although decorators require classes and React now is mostly classless.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
you know, so it's a problem.
Yeah.
Life's hard. Okay, we are more or less at the end of our content part. Is there really anything else we should be mentioning in the context of React that we haven't? Maybe things that you're excited in upcoming versions that you're hoping for the React team to introduce?
Yeah, so React, like I said, is going to move into this like async React version, which is going to be the future of React. I'm pretty excited about it because so far we've had to depend on frameworks to fetch our data. Now it starts to kind of come back into React, and we don't have to actually need a framework to use things like use, which I'm super excited about. So that's something to keep an eye out on how data fetching is going to change and how loading components and reading from these promises is going to change with the future of React.
Interesting. I would like to see some sort of built-in. We kind of have it in with React Server Components, but I would like to see more explicit support for streaming built
Oh,
into the framework.
yes.
Um, it actually has to go with another one of the examples that I have in my talk, um, which is actually using a generator on the server. If you're familiar with generator
Mm.
functions, so you can actually
Oh,
wrap a generator as kind of a server function, and then you create a stream of data coming into the client, and you can, let's say, re-render a React component whenever you get an update from the server, which
uh-huh.
is really, really cool.
Yeah, and you
Uh,
just keep going through the next soffit.
yeah. Now, right
Mm.
now, I need to do something. I need to use a use effect in order to achieve it.
Hmm.
It would be great if it would somehow be
Um,
better integrated. I guess that React, the core team would say something that you effectively can get it using React Server Components already, but I would like to see something nicer, a real stream type implementation. Uh,
have you tried render to pipeable stream or readable stream
I
actually?
have to say that the ORPC implementation is just so nice. I can show it to you after we finish our conversation. It's just so clean that that I'm happy with it. But if there are alternatives, after I show you, you can tell me if there are potentially nicer built-in alternatives in React itself.
Hmm.
Okay, then. So to finish up our show, we have our picks section. And in our picks, we just shout out what's ever interesting for us or to us. It can be technical, it can be non technical, any topic that we want. So I'm going to start because that's what we do. We let our guests go last. Uh, the first pick I had is one that I already mentioned, is the fact that I'm the keynote speaker at the upcoming React Next conference. It's actually scheduled to take place on December 15th. I don't know if this episode will air before then or after then. If you're listening to the live stream, well, it hasn't happened yet. I'm really excited about it. I think I've got some really, really cool demos. It's an interesting topic, one that's really near and dear to my heart. I think that the comeback of RPC is really, really interesting. Interestingly enough, the very next day, I'm giving a talk, not a keynote, a regular talk at yet another conference here in Tel Aviv called Node TLV. It's a conference for Node developers. And this is the first time that a talk of mine, the title of the talk was actually kind of censored, I would say, by the conference organizers, which is really amusing. And when I asked them why they did it, they basically looked at me and told me, "Are you serious?" So, uh, the title of my talk, the current title, is using heap dumps to find and fix Node.js memory and CPU problems. So
Is
I'm
it
basically talking about how to take heap dumps, both programmatically and using dev tools and whatever other mechanism, and then how to analyze them in order to find and fix memory and CPU issues. Now,
Oh.
why did they censor the talk title? Because the original title was "Taking a Dump: Using Heap Dumps to Find and Fix Node.js Memory and CPU Problems." So yeah, I think that was like uh, too much for them.
Oh,
So
that's
they
an interesting title. I
yeah,
do like it though.
you should look, you should see the slides that I'm using. I
Oh,
didn't censor the slides.
yeah, I would love to check it out. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good talk. So I'm giving these two talks. So that would be my first pick. My second pick is a bit of news that dropped today or yesterday, is the fact that Anthropic is purchasing Bun. I don't, have you heard about that?
I have not. Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so Bun has been sold to Anthropic. It's becoming part of Anthropic. The Bun core team, including everybody, is going to become Anthropic employees, and they're going to continue working on the project. And the project will continue as an open source project. So effectively, for people who are using Bun, it continues as is. In fact, it's great news because for those of you who don't know, Bun was a VC-backed open source company, which means that they got their money, which funded their development efforts from VCs. But VCs like to see return on investment. In the case of companies such as Vercel, who are maintaining Next.js, they were selling hosting services. The same, by the way, for Dino. But Bun had no such thing. So there was an obvious question about how Bun are going to be able to continue as a VC funded open source organization without an actual revenue stream. And the obvious answer is they're going to be sold. And they were sold to Anthropic. And Anthropic is committed to continue to support them and continue to support this open source project. So I think it's good news for the open source community and for the future of Bun. By the way, we had I forget the name of Bun's founder. Um, you remember his name?
No.
We had him as a guest on our show as well. I'll remember
Jared
in a sec.
Summer?
Yeah, exactly, Jared Sumner. We actually had him in a guest quite a while when Bun was really, really new. We brought him on to talk about why he built it and what's his philosophy and his goal with this project. It's a really good episode, even though it's I think it was like something like 2 years ago or something like that. I think it's still very pertinent, and I recommend to our listeners to listen to it. So those would actually be our my picks for today. All of them technical, I guess. Shruti, do you have any picks for us?
Yes, I will shamelessly plug my YouTube channel. You can find React content, more of what we talked about, all of the code examples with
What's
live
the name of
demos.
the channel?
It's called Shruti Kapoor, just my first name and my last name. You can just YouTube me up, Shruti Kapoor, and you will find my channel. I have like what 250 videos at this point, live streams
Wow,
included.
that's a lot.
That is a lot. Yeah.
Do you prefer the long form or the short form videos?
I like long form because short form is very ephemeral. Maybe it hits some people and then it just gets lost. Long form is more watchable. I feel you can deliver a lot more content in it, and you can deliver a lot more value, and you can actually show like code demos properly in long form. In short form, it just gets like weirdly cropped out. I don't like short form.
So you're
Short
not the TikTok generation.
No, I'm too old for that. But I do like short form for like quick tips. So in the month of December, I'm doing the full month of AMA, Ask Me Anything series. So I have picked questions that people have left in comments, and I'm making a short form video out of each of
Oh,
them.
wow.
So every day I'm answering one question that the audience has left me in my YouTube comments or in the shorts. So if the audience who's listening to this podcast has a question, you can also put that in the chat and I will pick it up and make a video out of it. So some
Oh, that's
questions that
awesome.
people, yeah. So like, especially like when I've made AI videos, people have asked questions like, do you still need to learn front end in this age of AI? or is front end going to die because everybody's going to become a full stack developer? So there's real concerns that people have, and they've left that in comments, and I'm
The
making it.
so Primagen made a video about the Bun purchase by Anthropic,
Uh,
and one of the things he said that here's this company who's basically building AI development tool, and they purchased a project that's been developed by programmers, by developers. So that goes to answer your question about, do developers still have a role in our world?
Exactly. And like the answer to that question is like we're going to need people who are going to build these systems. So even if you're writing AI code, we're going to need people who understand what that front end code should look like. Like I was saying earlier, like if you use Claude to generate activity code, like React 19 activity code, it is all garbage. So you need to know what is the right thing. So knowing your AI, like knowing your front end fundamentals is very important, even if you're using AI to write code and build complete apps in the future. So,
I totally agree.
right. So yeah, shamelessly plugging my YouTube channel. Go check it out. Like, subscribe, comment, and hit that bell icon so you get notified of the new videos. Um, I also want to shout out Code Rabbit, which is a AI code reviewer. Again, speaking of AI code tools, one of the tools that actually helps, and I have been using a lot this year for reviewing my code is Code Rabbit. Like I said earlier in this episode, I have quit my 9 to 5 job, which means that all of the code I write, I am the only owner, but it gets read by so many people. So I want to make sure that my code is well written, it is performant, but also it catches things like it's reviewed properly, and I'm also catching things like breaking responses and error cases. So CodeRapid has been really helpful in helping me see those errors, especially things that I may miss, things that I'm like writing super fast and may forget. So great code review tool, completely free for open source tools. So check that out. It's called
I,
CodeRabbit.
I totally agree. We actually use CodeRabbit at Sisense, so
Oh, cool.
every PR undergoes review by CodeRabbit in addition to manual review.
Hmm.
And I have to say that it's really a great tool. It
Mm-hmm.
very often I find and fix most issues before they even get to be to the point where the manual review is required. So we
Yeah.
still require manual review, but by the time we get there, uh, CodeRabbit is I probably fixed like 5 or 6 different things that CodeRabbit has found for me. Two things that I really liked about CodeRabbit is, first of all, the way they kind of use emojis to
Hmm.
indicate what they're doing, like the eyes emojis, like that I'm looking at it,
Yeah.
or stuff like that, or like the thumbs up emoji, and basically they make very effective use of emojis to indicate what's going on, and even allow you to respond
Yeah.
to their comments, like say if you want to basically say, yes, I've handled something, or I'm handling something, or I'm intentionally, or I hear you but I've decided to ignore this recommendation. You can
Hmm.
kind of indicate those things, your intentionality, using emojis, which is really cool. So
Hmm.
that's one thing I really liked about it. Another thing that I really liked about it is that it also kind of diagrams your code. So
Hmm.
even if you're getting a person to review your code in additional to CodeRabbit, it can make it very much easier for them to actually understand what they're looking at, what the changes are, and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
like you said, I really like and appreciate that tool.
Yeah, and like on top of that, it also adds to the summary of the PR itself. So let's say if you're somebody like me who hates writing PR descriptions, it can actually improve it for you by looking at what code you're adding. So it'll add a nice summary of this was what it was added, these are the features, this is the code change. So it's really helpful in making a like the code review process much smoother.
Totally agree with you. So you kind of gave it already, but let's give it yet again. If people want to get in touch with you, contact you, maybe send you questions that you can create videos about them, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch with me is to actually comment on my video. I obsessively watch my videos, comments, and read all of them. You can
Oh
also,
no.
I know people have told me not to, but I can't stop. That will be a New Year's resolution. Um, but yeah, you can actually leave a comment on any of my video to let me know what video you want to see next. But you can also send me a DM on Twitter. I'm at Shruti Kapoor 08, my first name, last name, and 08, which is my birthday. I'm obsessed with my birthday, which is coming up in 5 days. If
Oh,
you're born like
you were born in December?
I was, yes. I'm a
So good
December
for
baby.
so good for you. Mine as well. So I was talking about the fact that I have these two conferences on the 15th and the 16th. Actually, my wife's birthday is on the 14th,
Oh,
and my own birthday is on the 17th.
oh,
So so we have my wife's birthday, then one conference and another conference, and then my birthday. So it'll be
nice.
interesting week.
It's like sandwich between conferences. So you can celebrate and then go enjoy the conferences and then celebrate your amazing talks.
Exactly. Um, so happy birthday to you.
Thank you. And to you.
Thank you very much. Um, and I guess that with that we'll wrap up, right?
Yes,
Nothing more to add.
nothing more to
So
add.
so thank you very much to all our listeners. It's been a great episode. Thank you, Shruti, for coming on our show to talk about React 19, or actually more accurately, 19.2, even though we also talked about React 19 in general. And to all our listeners, thank you very much for joining us and see you again next time.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.